As a finance professor, I often get asked, what's the economy going to do, or what stock should I invest in? I love what I do, but if I knew that answer, do you think I would be here today? It's after 12 o'clock. I'd be on a beach somewhere with an adult beverage in my hand, reading a book, and I would not share that secret with anybody. So what the Fed does is going to be extremely important. So this is one of the things that I'm watching closely. You've probably heard in the news they talk about QE2. And QE2 is supposed to expire this summer. That's the Federal Reserve buying lots and lots of securities here. Well, if they stop buying, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Is the market going to continue okay on its own? Or is that market going to collapse and we see real high interest rates and real high inflation? Now, the one that I think is more important is what you've probably seen in some of the current discussions in terms of fiscal policy. What the government is doing in terms of the annual deficit and the national debt. Nobody had to fly Southwest right? Just to make sure. National debt outstanding. I'll give you just a very, very brief history lesson here. From George Washington to Jimmy Carter, it took us 200 years to accumulate just under our first $1 trillion in national debt. $934 billion. During President Reagan's 2 terms, we nearly tripled the national debt from just under $1 trillion to $2.7 trillion. During Bush the First, we added an additional $1.5 trillion. And so now we're at about $4 trillion. During the Clinton administration's 2 terms, we added another $1.6 trillion. And during Bush II's, we nearly doubled the national debt again, going from $5.7 trillion to $10.6 trillion. And then, as of April 15th of this month, we're at about $14.3 trillion. As I mentioned before, my wife and I have 4 children. 14.3 trillion divided by a ballpark figure, 310, 320 million Americans, means that we're looking at somewhere between $45,000 and $50,000 per man, woman, and child in terms of your part of the national debt. And so at $50,000, 6 of us in our family, $300,000, I can tell you, I do not have $300,000 so I can write a check to pay off my part of the national debt. My guess is that most of you don't, and even if you did, you sure wouldn't want to do that. We could also look at the number of taxpayers. About $129,000 per taxpayer in terms of our national debt. Regardless of your political affiliation, there is, from an economic perspective, no way that we can continue to sustain this level of national debt. Our national debt right now exceeds the value of our national income. First time it's happened, where we're now over the national debt. All that we owe is more than GDP, about 103% right now. Back in this time, we were only looking at about 10%, 15%. Now we're at over 100%. Now, does it mean all is lost? No, all is not lost. We can take care of this problem. But unfortunately, in Washington, we have legislatures that don't necessarily get it. And part of it is because of their backgrounds. What do I mean by that? What's the #1 occupation of a politician before they go into public office?
Attorney.
Or a lawyer. That would be way too easy to make lawyer jokes, so we're not going to do that. But I've got lawyers in my faculty that teach business law, and they'll be the first to tell you in terms of the amount of economic training they have. How much economic training do you think the average lawyer has? 0. Over 40% of those that are in Congress, both the House and the Senate, were lawyers before they went in. 18%, less than a fifth, have an MBA degree. They have some formal training in business. Not necessarily you have to have formal training in business to understand it, but it gives you a way of at least kind of measuring that. These are the folks that determine economic policy in the United States. Most of them have had no economic training. Now, the economics of it doesn't have to be particularly complicated. This is the Congressional Budget Office. It's nonpartisan. These are their estimates of what things are going to look like over the next 10 years. Now, we're currently in fiscal year 2011. And if you recall, just a couple of weeks ago, we're going to look at a little bit of that, they were fighting over the budget over this time period. Right? They had to pass the budget for the last part of it. And then our 2012 will actually start on October 1st. And so they've got their estimates on what their revenues are and what their outlays are. And if we go out, we can see that over that 10-year period, they're estimating that outlays are going to be about $40 to $45 trillion. So again, keep these things in perspective, because both the president and the Republicans, Paul Ryan has come out with his plan, and both, although they get there from different ways, both make big news because they're talking about cutting about $4 trillion from government spending over the next 10 years. Now, for all of us, $4 trillion is a lot of money. For most of us, $4 trillion, the number itself is just not imaginable. But put it in context, $4 is what your savings is going to be. $40 is what you're spending over the next 10 years. Does 4 seem all that big all of a sudden compared to the 40? Not really. So let's zoom in. I'm going to show you, I'm not a politician. I don't play one on TV either. We're going to zoom in on some of those figures so you can see a little bit better. And I've got an extremely simple plan. I'll admit it's a little oversimplistic, but an extremely simple plan for balancing the budget. It doesn't involve one cut. 2011, we're expected to spend, the government, about $3.6 trillion. Using the CBO's own forecast, we expect to have revenues of about $3.6 trillion in 2015. My simple plan, freeze spending at its current level. You don't have to cut it, just simply freeze it. In 4 years, the budget will be balanced. Now you can take other approaches to this, so you can spread it out over 8 years, and so you can let the outlays grow slightly. But the politician will say, oh, no, we can't do that because so much of this is mandatory spending. There is no mandatory spending. They create the laws. They can change the laws if they want. None of it is mandatory. It's just that that's what they want to do. Put it all in perspective here again. It's about $3.6 trillion in outlays. A couple of weeks ago, they were all crowing. They were so proud of themselves that they came together and they're going to cut $38 billion out of the budget. And then at the last moment, it almost got derailed because of the $300 million that they was in the budget for Planned Parenthood. Now again, regardless of whether you like Planned Parenthood, you don't like Planned Parenthood, that's not the point. When you hear $3.6 trillion, or $38 billion, or $300 million, again, all of those are just way out of what we can comprehend. So let's get rid of all of those extra zeros. Put it in perspective. We've got an annual budget of $36,000, and we're super excited because we've got $380 on the budget. And some folks were fighting over that last $3, and we're willing to shut down the government for that. Keep it in perspective. Again, $300 million is a lot of money. When you're talking trillions of dollars, it's nothing. It really is nothing. It takes 1 million millions to get to a trillion. Think about that. 1 million is a trillion. So when you're talking 300 million, it's just a drop in the bucket compared to those total outlays.